3:30 in the afternoon in New York City, where we begin with breaking news this morning that former US President Donald Trump has just left a Manhattan criminal court. A short time ago, he pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Trump is on the move. We suspect he's on his way back to LaGuardia Airport in New York now. This is a picture of him in the criminal court not too long ago. He's there, stony-faced, as a defendant, sitting with his defence team, which included his attorney, Joe Tacopina. He had ignored media requests early as he arrived in the courtroom. He is expected to give a press conference a little bit later on in the day, but that is not until he arrives back in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. So on this note, let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Annelise Nielsen, as we take the live shot. Annelise, good to see you this afternoon, your time. We're back following a motorcade. He is, as I just said, on his way back to LaGuardia Airport, but bring us up to speed with what's happened.
Yeah, look, Pete, we're just at the court. This is the park across from the court, and this is where we've been waiting for all this information. So to give our viewers a bit of background about how this is all played out, there weren't cameras allowed in the room. There were around 50 journalists who were allowed in after lining up overnight for a ballot, and so we're still waiting for some of that information to come out. But we do understand it's 34 different counts on this indictment, and we're told it's a Class E felony. Now, felony does sound bad. It literally does mean that it's liable for jail time, but what we do understand is that Class E is about as low classification as you can get in New York, and especially for a first-time offender. I don't think there's any suggestion that Donald Trump has a criminal history. It's extremely unlikely that he would ever have any kind of jail time if he is found guilty, but that's still a long way off from the breadth of evidence that seems to be on the table here. I think we're talking about a trial that could last between 2 weeks and a month, which could be absolutely extraordinary during a presidential election campaign. But it's been interesting scenes outside court here today. I don't know if my camera operator is able to do a bit of a pan just to show where we are, but this is the park opposite the courtroom where this all took place. There was a large gathering of those who were very supportive of the indictment, anti-Trump protesters, I think you could say. There was a small group of Trump supporters as well, but the police were very on top of this. They'd separated the courtyard in this park out into different areas with different entrances and exits, and so they weren't able to interact. That really kept down a lot of the normal altercations you'd expect to see at an event like this, and so this was probably quite well handled by police. I know there's been some reporting saying it's been a bit chaotic. For the time I've been here, it's been quite well managed, and the only real thing that seemed to cause a bit of alarm was Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican firebrand from Georgia, showing up, and honestly a lot of that was just journalists as well jockeying to try to speak to her. It wasn't necessarily the actual supporters that had come out.
So just back on the courtroom, Annelise, and you mentioned about a felony, so a misdemeanor rather. So I'm just going off the LA Times here as we're continuing to follow Donald Trump's motorcade. And folks, just in the bottom of your screen there, that's a press conference that we're expecting from Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, anytime soon. So as soon as we see him, we will go to that. But Annelise, so the LA Times reporting here, falsification of business records, normally a misdemeanor under New York law, but the prosecutor elevated it to a felony on the grounds that the conduct was intended to conceal another underlying crime. Do we suspect that that is to influence an election?
Well, I mean, that's more what we need the information from the hearing and the actual unsealed indictment. But you can assume that Alvin Bragg would know that you can't go forward with something as serious as a criminal conviction for a former president without some level of seriousness. If you're going to go after someone like Donald Trump for a few misdemeanors, I mean, any district attorney has to weigh out the investment that you put into a crime for the seriousness, for the desired outcome, all those things, and that's true of any person. So for him to be trying to go through all this just for some misdemeanors would be pretty extraordinary. So I think there's that level to it. But maybe there's more to it that we don't know. Maybe there's witnesses that have been interviewed that haven't been reported on publicly, and that's all going to be released as we get more information. But again, there weren't really any journalists allowed in the room to be putting this information out live. Those ones who were in there were told that they couldn't have electronic recording devices. There were spillover rooms where they could have extra journalists in there that did have recording devices, and some of those hung out in the corridor trying to grab Donald Trump as he went in and out. Today there was speculation that he would try and say something to the reporters as he came in and out of the room, but that wasn't the case. We saw he came in looking rather glum, I would say. I don't know if you thought the same from the photos. But,
no, he definitely looks stony-faced.
Like the seriousness of this really was.
Yeah, and even that, I mean, we've only been seeing fleeting glimpses of him, haven't we, Annelise? I mean, there was just that moment when he walked into the criminal court in Manhattan. There was that moment when he left Trump Towers a little earlier today. There was a brief moment when he left the court, and then another brief moment when he got into his motorcade heading back to LaGuardia Airport. Now, so just to fast forward here to Alvin Bragg, so is he going to outline, I mean, America does things a little differently, so is he going to outline the case against Donald Trump when he gives his press conference in a short while?
I think that's what that's the understanding we have. And again, I know we keep saying this, it's all so unprecedented. I think that they will have to put that case forward, as well as giving us information about what Donald Trump is allowed to say. Was there any kind of gag order? That was another suggestion of what the court might be implementing in this hearing, which you can do in certain circumstances, but would be an extraordinary thing to do to a former president, to say you can't even talk about this case against you, where you're the defendant. And one of the issues there is that if you breach a gag order, that's how you get fines, but it can also cause you to be liable for jail time, 30 days in jail for breaching a court order. And so some of Trump's supporters have already been putting that out into the ether, saying they're doing this on purpose. They want to catch him out on a technicality because ultimately this is a political thing where they want to see Donald Trump behind bars. I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but that's the perspective that's been put forward. So
NBC reporting that there was indeed fingerprints that were taken. Is there any indication that a mugshot was taken, Annelise? Do we know anything about that at this stage?
The fingerprints being taken was confirmed through reporting. We're still awaiting on the mugshot, but it seems highly unlikely. Trump's legal team pushed back on this. And when you think of all the reasons why someone would have a mugshot, it is not really that relevant for a former president on trial. Everyone knows who he is. There's no question of a secret police proceeding, hiding the rights of a defendant, to have transparency in their case. And there's also no suggestion that he'd be able to up and run away without everyone knowing exactly who he is and what the case is if he was in some outlandish scenario to be on the run. So I think that they probably negotiated their way out of that, which I think is pretty extraordinary. I actually thought that they would want to use that. He's saying he's being persecuted. It's political persecution. Why wouldn't you want that mugshot and to plaster it everywhere to say, look, they're coming after me because they're scared of me?
No, that's right. And we did speak about that yesterday too, didn't we? You know, it's going to be weaponised both for the Democrats, saying, look, this is what you potentially could vote in at the next election, and you do not want that, while Donald Trump will be, I would suspect, using it as proof that, well, it's an example of the system that is against us. Donald Trump, as we already alluded to, he hasn't spoken since court, but there's been plenty of activity on Truth Social, Annelise. He mentioned earlier, heading to Lower Manhattan, the courthouse seems so surreal. Wow, they are going to arrest me. Can't believe this is happening in America. Make America great again. The radical left Democrats have criminalised the justice system. This is not what America is supposed to be. And a sharp rebuke too for Juan Merchan. He is the judge who's overseeing this case. Trump's had a crack at him. The highly partisan judge and his family are well-known Trump haters. He was an unfair disaster on a previous Trump-related case. Wouldn't recuse, gave horrible jury instructions. On and on it goes. I suspect he's going to have to rein that in, Annelise. We're bringing it, there's some of it on your screen now. I suspect Donald Trump's going to have to rein some of this in before this press conference later on.
Well, not necessarily, because in any system you shouldn't have the same judge doing the grand jury trial as you have doing the actual criminal trial. That's a huge conflict of interest, and so there should be some kind of separation. And now that that decision's already been made, you're allowed to make that commentary in the United States. I know in Australia we have a principle about contempt of judicial proceedings being a way that you can be caught in contempt of court. That's not quite the same in the US with the protections that you are granted under the Constitution, under freedom of speech. So I wouldn't necessarily point to that. I think the thing to focus there on is Donald Trump's push to have the trial heard in Staten Island. I think that's likely to be the subject of a hearing, at least to have it heard in a different court. And there is a very good argument to be made that he wouldn't get a fair trial here, the depth of the publicity, and also just the fact that this is a very strong Democrat area. And we saw with the protesters here today, it was a lot who were in support of the indictment. They managed to rally quickly, and they were the ones making noise to interrupt the Conservative speakers who came. And so that's obviously going to work against him in obtaining a fair trial.
Just a short time ago, our colleagues at Sky News in the UK, Annelise, they were speaking to Anthony Scaramucci, who had an interesting take on Donald Trump and what this whole court case will mean. I just want to play you some of that audio and get your reaction off the back of that. This was Anthony Scaramucci. So he was a very short-lived communications director for Donald Trump when he was president. So he may well have an axe to grind, but this was the mooch speaking to our colleagues a short time ago.
But I don't see a path back to the American presidency. When Mr. Trump starts to realize that, it's my prediction that he'll withdraw from the race.
You think he'll withdraw from the race, do you?
I do. I think that you're going to have a combination of things happen here. He has very good political instincts. He's only going to be in that race if he thinks he can win it. He doesn't want to be a three-time loser. Remember, he's had the worst electoral results since Herbert Hoover. He lost the House, the Senate, and the American presidency. And I think he's going to be up against it on the legal side for the next 6 to 12 months. And he'll fake an illness or an injury and pull out of the race. He does not want to be in this race if he doesn't think he can win it. And it'll become very clear to him, and he's got very good political instincts, that this is becoming an unwinnable situation for him.
OK, so that's Anthony Scaramucci talking to our colleagues in the UK. Annelise, what's your take on that?
Look, I take that with a grain of salt. Donald Trump doesn't think he's lost any elections. He does think that he's won everything. He's making a lot of money. $8 million is the latest estimate being briefed out by Trump's camp about how much money he's raised since this news of his arrest became public. And this is one of the things that we should be keeping in mind here. This is a huge motivator, and it's one of the reasons Republicans are concerned, because one of the issues that they're having here is that he is raising money early. He has announced very early that he is running again, and it's made it much harder for anyone else running for the race. But the fact that he can get donations as far out, we shouldn't ignore. I don't know. It's just so hard to say because there's no precedent for this. There's genuinely everyone who's trying to say how it's going to play out. We don't know. We don't have a blueprint of a previous president who's been convicted of a crime while they're running again for office to say how it plays in the public. There's a marketing campaign to be had, and I just don't know if he has the right people around him to do it. I noticed that he didn't have any family come with him today, which I think is quite notable.